Is this working? I'm usually a behind-the-scenes person, so you'll have to forgive me. My unpracticed emceeing here. But I think we're going to get started. So I want to just begin by acknowledging that MOHAI stands on the unceded lands and waters of the Duwamish, Suquamish, Muckleshoot, and other Coast Salish nations. And we acknowledge the forced displacement of Native communities from this land, and we honor the endurance of the Duwamish people who are still here. I will also point out that there are restrooms through the cafe and also on the other side of the atrium. And there are all-gender restrooms on the second floor, if you're interested. And with that, I want to welcome you to the opening celebration of Teamsters, Turtles, and Beyond, the legacy of the Seattle WTO protests. So I'm Michaela Woodward. I'm the Curator of Community Engagement here at MOHAI, and it has been my honor and pleasure to develop this exhibit with Curator Jim Gregory, who is here. There he is. And the rest of the exhibits team here at MOHAI. So I'm just going to do that thing that everyone does when you tell them you're working on an exhibit about the WTO. So in November 1999, my then husband and I joined the massive labor protest that was coming from Seattle Center to protest the WTO. I had a 2-year-old in my backpack on my back, and as we got close to downtown, a very kind young man approached and said, there's a lot of tear gas up ahead, you might want to get your baby out of here. And I was like, oh, thank you. So we peeled off past a row of riot cops on horseback and went home. And so even at the time I knew this was a huge thing that was going on, but I think it took many years for me to understand what exactly happened and why and how. And so it's been really amazing and inspiring to be able to dig into that as doing the research for this exhibit, reading dozens of oral histories and other materials in MOHAI's collection and also at the UW Labor Archives, which is an amazing resource, and they were tremendous partners for this project. And also to spend time talking with people who were there, many of you in this room, people who were organizing the protests, pulling together this powerful, complicated coalition of people and organizations who often didn't agree about much of anything except that they were opposed to the policies of the WTO, but were able to work together to create this tremendous, successful shutting down of the conference. I talked to people who were involved in policing the event and better understanding the position they were in and what they learned from how things unfolded, and people who were documenting the events, and people who have continued to be involved in fighting for justice locally and globally. So it was fascinating and inspiring to hear these stories, and I'm super excited to share them with our visitors here at MOHAI. We have gathered a few of those wonderful people here today to share their reflections. I'm going to introduce them as they come up. I'm going to do my best to keep each of them to 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. Let's see, is there anything else I need to say before we start doing that? I will say that we have not coordinated ahead of time what people are going to say or even what order they're going to go in. So it is a decentralized plan here, as happened in 1999. I think we'll start with Dana Shorholtz. Dana's like, oh, yeah, I'm calling on you all. Do I need to introduce you? No. Okay, go for it.
I wanted to just make a correction that it said founder of Seattle Nonviolent Action Group. I am not a founder. There's a founder in here, Vivian Sharples. I was part of Seattle Nonviolent Action Group, and I was a co-founder in Art and Revolution, which was kind of a prelude to the action camp, which was called, I think, Boot Camp for Activists, where we planned the shutdown, where we built the lock boxes and planned how each intersection would be taken over by an affinity group. So that's kind of my part as well as documenting. So what I want to speak about, because I think the other people have really interesting things, I'm sure, to say about the protests from their perspective. So I was a documentary photographer for about 15 years, from ACT UP to low-income housing, a lot of Seattle struggles that a lot of the people that were at the WTO participated in for years and years. And I've always thought of resistance as the lifeblood of democracy. And so I think what was so amazing about the WTO from my perspective as both an activist organizer and also an activist photographer was that it brought together so many different people, as Michaela was saying, from so many different organizations and backgrounds and perspectives. And by all of us coming together with shared values, shared humanity of, like, we did not want corporations to continue to take the world away, basically. And by standing up and sitting down for what we believe in, for community needs over corporate greed, basically, that in that moment we are honoring life, right? And so all of us coming together in that way and honoring life is that idea of, like, love in a public space. We were met with, confusion and a lot of ignorance, I think. But the courage kind of came through no matter what, and the courage to stand for life. And so that kind of action, it lives on in a way that, it's unquantifiable. We all stand on the shoulders of everybody that's come before us, and movements, the people making history. And so we were part of, adding, I think, of it like a vertebrae to the backbone of humanity that week in Seattle. And more specifically, what I want to comment on as an educator, I teach children now and infuse a lot of social justice curriculum, is that I just think that because of the way history is often told in history books, the way it's told, the way it's conveyed to us through the media, corporate media, often people forget, or maybe they just don't even know, that it is made by everyday people like ourselves, and that's such an important message. And so I'm grateful to MOHAI and to all of us that continue to tell the stories of resistance, of the lifeblood of democracy, from a perspective that is not corporate, from a perspective that is truly from the ground up and from the people who make the history. Because so much of human, like, the development, the moral arc of society, all of that is really, that's informed by these kinds of actions and the everyday actions of people who believe that another world is possible. And we realize that not only, like, were we saying another world is possible, but in that moment, that week, it was there. Like, we felt it in our core that this is another world, and that we're all connected. It's like an age-old truth, an ancient wisdom, but that the quality of my life affects the quality of your life, and the more than human world, and that connection is, to me, that is, understanding that and feeling that is the hope in action that was being realized during the WTO week. So I just want to ready for that.
Dana contributed many photographs that are in the exhibit. She was able to take, before she she got arrested illegally. But that's another story you can tell later. The next person I'm going to call up is Schliffer, who's a member of the Coeur d'Alene tribe and as union organizer and also a photographer who contributed many photos to the exhibit. Came all the way from Spokane to be with us today. So.
It's been a long time since I've been in front of the mic. I never practiced any of my speeches before, and I was always worried about getting a senior moment when I stepped up there. We were in the middle of a 2-year labor dispute with Kaiser Aluminum. Charles Hurwitz, a corporate raider, Maxam, and I had joined the Road Warriors down in Humboldt County, California, when our people had hooked up with Julia Butterfly and the environmental thing that was happening down there, and fighting against Pacific Lumber and Maxam about the clear cutting of the ancient redwoods. And so when I first got there, I saw some really eye-opening things. There's just too many details. I can't go into all of it. But I realized just really how serious things really were. And the Alliance for the Sustainable Jobs and Environment was being formed to bring labor and environment together rather than, you know, the rape and pillage and protest and vandalism and arson and stuff, you know, because by then logging and fishing industry in the Northwest, for example, had been really decimated by then. And so bringing the labor and environment together, and then there was also all this issue that was going on with the possibility of getting caught up in some kind of crime that maybe somebody was going to commit with an arson or something, that we could get caught up in that. So it was just like one thing after another. And then the issues about the WTO came along, so the whole pile was together fighting, you know, to get our 3,000 people their jobs back, and the corporate raider and the clear cutting and on and on. And so we spent the next 5 to 6 months and tens of thousands of miles all up and down the West Coast organizing for all this stuff in the WTO. And I was had moved from Humboldt County up to Portland in somewhere in the late summer, spring, or fall, or something like that. And having grown up in Port Angeles, I know all about the rain, and so I thought I need a good raincoat. And so I spent a month going all over Portland and could not find a raincoat made in the USA, not one. And so most of those good winter coats, ski coats and stuff, are about $200. So I found this one for about $50, made in Hong Kong. And so this is one of the coats I wore here, and when I provided pictures, there's some, I'm wearing that. And so it was one of the first day we were here, there was a convention up by I-5, and there was a bunch of labor people talking about things, and Roby Robinson, some of you probably know him, he's this tall guy that had a booming voice, and he was always going on about, you know, sweatshops and stuff. And he got up there and he started talking about these $200 ski coats. And he was saying that, you know, these workers take, you know, close to 2 hours to make one of these $200 jackets, and they'll make somewhere around 50 cents in wages. And I realized the state is making something like 30 times that much in sales tax. I mean, is anybody from the state embarrassed about this? You know, or is this just a deal where it sucks to be you? And so a couple weeks ago, I was talking with one of the Spokane tribal members and telling him I was coming here and going to talk about this stuff. And he says, well, where are they now? And I said, I'm not too sure. You know, there's, over the last 25 years, a lot's changed and stuff. So I started doing some Googling, and I really couldn't find any really good, solid evidence, but it kind of seemed like some of these minimum wages have gone up by about 10 times. So they're making somewhere between $3.50 and $4.50 an hour, something like that. But you ballpark that number, and the state is still making more in sales tax than the people that are making the product. So it was really hard to tell if those people are actually any better off today than they were 25 years ago because of the cost of living. Maybe their minimum wage has gone up, but so has housing and everything else. I could go on forever about this, but I really want to thank the museum for doing this, because what we went through was something workers shouldn't have to deal with this. It was, there was a lot of really bad things that happened during the second year of that. 3 people took ropes and hanged themselves. There was scabs pulling guns and knives on their people. Fights broke out in parking lots. A fist fight broke out in a bank. And I could go on down at Pacific Lumber. One of the loggers threatened to kill this young man, David Gypsy Chain, and an hour later he dropped a tree on him and killed him. So we were having to deal with a lot. And finally, after that 2 years was up, people really looked back on some real open wounds. And I look at this, I think this is kind of what they did here, is like the period at the end of the last sentence. This really needs to be done. I don't know how I'm gonna feel a year from now, but you know, the biggest crime that these people committed to be subjected to all this was they were going to work and just earning a living to look after their homes and families. And that shouldn't have to be happening. And after what we saw out there on the road, people were commonly going, that's happening in this country? I mean, here? I mean, they were thinking, you know, that's third world stuff. So what you guys did is really personally important to me, and I just really want to thank everybody that put this together, and I really appreciate it. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. And you know, we definitely couldn't have done it without all of you contributing your stories and photographs, and all the hard work you did for all those years. Thank you. I'm going to call up Heather Day. Are you ready, Heather? Awesome. Heather is the co-founder of the Community Alliance for Global Justice, among many other amazing things.
Hey everyone, it's so nice to see so many familiar faces. This is an important moment. I want to thank Jim for writing this exhibit. It's wonderful, and MOHAI. Kayla, it's been wonderful working with you. Yeah, and I haven't planned what I'm going to say either. It's hard to follow you too. Yeah, so a little bit about my story. I was coming into this after getting a brilliant radical education at Evergreen State College, and learning about free trade and globalization, and there was the NAFTA-GATT Justice Committee that came together. That was one of the many statewide coalitions fighting NAFTA, and that was just, you know, that's what I had been studying, so I was really fortunate to get my first education in that kind of activism there in Olympia. Then I found CISPIS, the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, and that really trained me as an organizer. And, you know, I learned more about neoliberalism from, you know, the people that we met on delegations in El Salvador than I could have ever learned anywhere else. It was a very profound experience going to El Salvador several times. So I was working for CISPIS when the protests were coming up. But it was very strange because, you know, the national office was in New York, and I had just come here from there, just moved back to Seattle, and, you know, I'm like, there's so much going on. Like, there's these neighborhood meetings, there's the downtown office, and then I started getting, like, hearing about the DAN meetings. I didn't really understand what it was, but I started going, and I was like, okay, this is it. This is where it's happening, I think. But I was like, national office, what do you think I should do? Like, should I go to all the meetings? Or I didn't know, you know, like, there was like, whatever, figure it out. So it was just that I was in a strange position because I was representing a national organization and trying to, you know, bring people from across the country and help them figure out how to participate. Or that's what I thought my role was. But anyway, when I look back at it, like I was so clueless. Like I just didn't understand the politics of what I was participating in really. Like I just didn't have any background in direct action was a big thing. So I kept asking like, where are the like mass spaces for participation for these, mass of people I was imagining organizing from across the country to participate. And of course they were organizing into affinity groups, and I, eventually figured out the mass action that I was part of organizing. But like, it really, it's really interesting. Like I was really coming from this, the FMLN, like Central American solidarity struggles of like, that were led by like socialists. That was like the space that I was learning about the most over those years, and it was just hard to put together with this other space. But anyway, I look back on it and just realized, God, it was just such a huge learning experience for me. And then, out of that, I helped form Community Alliance for Global Justice. I just stepped down. I'm trying to figure out what else to do with my life. You can help me with that. But, it's been my life's work ever since. So the WTO protests completely shaped my life. And at the time, I was really interested in bringing voices from the Global South, like trying to find spaces for them to be heard in Seattle. So I actually helped organize an event called Voices from the Global South. That took place on Wednesday, December 1st. So because of that, I didn't join an affinity group. Also, I was accompanying a Salvadoran labor organizer that CISPAS was just, every year we toured labor organizers, and he just happened to be coming that time of year. And I was like, great, he should be here on November 30th. And then, so he was, and he was part of the labor rally, on the stage and honored. And then we marched together and went downtown when the labor march, there's people who broke off infamously, and went into the direct action. And that was a really intense experience because he had so much to say later about it, sharing a little bit with some people just from his own experience. Completely different perspective. It was really intense and a political education just processing that with him. But so yeah, it was very meaningful to hear all the speakers that were there. There's no record of that event. I don't know if anybody took photos. If anybody knows of any record of that event, I'm always curious. But it was a packed room. We honored the people who had just been arrested that day. Yeah, it was incredible. And the stories, like all across the world from all of those people that were represented. And people kept saying, I want to be part of it too. And I remember it was at Garfield Community Center, and they had like this cutoff time, like we had to be out of there by 9, and it was terrible because we couldn't have questions. But anyway, there's just such common experiences expressed across those people from all over the world of what they were fighting against. And it was just like another reminder of why it was so important that we were fighting against the World Trade Organization and neoliberalism together. So just, my own experience, I like, as Dana described, like, it was just incredibly powerful to be part of organizing a direct action that was so successful. We were blown away, that day, downtown Seattle, we were looking at each other like, oh my God, we did it, like, this is crazy. And I think people don't understand how successful it was still, and that's part of why this exhibit is so important. But later that week too, it was just day after day. And one of my favorite memories was on Thursday. So when most of the arrests happened on Wednesday. Thursday, we're like, okay, we're gonna march again into the no protest zone. And I just remember going down Capitol Hill, and it was just like today. It was a beautiful, clear day, and the Olympics were out, and they were covered in snow. And you know how it's like one of the first times of the year in November you see the Olympics covered in snow? I grew up here. And it was just so moving to me. I just had this feeling like everything is with us, I just felt like the earth is with us on this day, and we're so powerful. It was really moving to me. And then I was crying. And then marching in the streets that end of that week, I just felt this like incredibly alive, sensitive feeling of just being so concerned and so like hyper aware of everything that was going on around me. And I remember in This Is What Democracy Looks Like, Hub Hopkins talks about the moment where people felt free. And he was talking about like really intense conflict moments of like fighting against the police. But I had that moment of just like, oh my God, like I am, yeah, just feeling like freedom and liberation and love in the streets, and I've carried that with me ever since. And as I know I need to wrap up, the director of an organization that is part of the legacy of the WTO has just been incredibly important to me to create spaces like this over the years for people to be aware, not only of what we accomplished that week, but also some of the through lines. Like I see, like I'm part of the food sovereignty movement that Levia Campesina was calling for food and agriculture to be out of trade that week, and they're still calling for that, still fighting against these global institutions. The direct action movement for climate justice and for liberation of Palestine is so active here. Independent media was one of the most important things that was accomplished that week. To me, that brings forth the Black Lives Matter movement and how important independent media was for that. And then, fighting billionaires. So, can I wrap up by reading the thing I gave to the exhibit? Okay, this is my last thing. So I found this sign. Does anybody tell me if you wrote it or if you know who did? But this is what I send to people every year on this day. I found it on a telephone pole. Congratulations, Seattle, for a job well done last week. You stared tyranny right in the face and refused to flinch, despite the best efforts of your own employees. Thanks to your vigilance, bravery, and spirit, the WTO, Bill Gates, big business, and the politicians who do their bidding have learned that the citizens of this city still value the principles of democracy and won't tolerate the secretive pillaging of the planet by an elite group of arrogant billionaires. You ought to be proud of yourselves, for not only did you disrupt the business of the WTO on this particular junket of theirs, but with all the publicity that has been broadcast around the world, no city will be eager to host one of their totalitarian covens again. While the media and the mayor have tried to convince you that you ought to be grateful to the police for having the decency not to kill you, remember that it is you that have shown the remarkable restraint while being tear gassed, pepper sprayed, clubbed, shot with rubber bullets, and kicked in the groin. Had the police suffered any of these abuses from even a single civilian, they would surely have retaliated in the most brutal and bloody manner upon us all. So remember, during this most joyous holiday season, that we still have the power, and we will keep it as long as we never lose the courage to exercise it. Yeah.
Is Gavin here? Can Gavin make it? Oh, awesome. Would you like to go next? This is Gavin Sullivan, who is an organizer with the Brown Collective and Students for Economic Democracy back in the day.
Back in the day. The token gringo in the Brown Collective. Yeah, similar. It's interesting having to think back 25 years at this point. We're old. I was texting with Miguel and Teresa about this earlier. I actually have a studio that's 2 blocks from the old Washington State Convention Center, and so I'm reminded of this event quite a bit. In addition, I'm a documentary filmmaker now, and my background actually was a correspondent for a very long time. And I'm consulting on a WTO featured documentary that's basically taking all the archive of the event. We're talking 400-500 hours of footage from that event. A lot of the footage that you actually see, not a lot of it, but a portion of the footage that you'll see upstairs was brought to you by Ian Bell, who's the editor and director on this project. But I've been stewing in the WTO for the last year, really just helping out and going through cuts of this, of the events and the documentary that's taken shape. And so having to stew on these questions of, what was the impact, really? And for me, I don't know if it could be summed up better, really. I've got a quick quote, and I'll keep all of this pretty short here. In the era of mass communication, all of our politics are changing. Here is the fundamental question. Is the pop culture in this country more influential now than its institutions? We are in a position where the voters are fed up with both parties. They're looking for new choices, and if the American people are presented with a viable different choice, they may just take it. In response to whether he is for WTO, no, we are against that. He is not for WTO. He is not for NAFTA, and he is not for GATT. He doesn't think we are getting free or even fair trade. He believes that when the economy takes a downturn, you will see the impact of all those international trade agreements. Anybody want to take a guess on who that was? Roger Stone, November 28th, 1999, 2 days before the WTO protest. I really encourage you all. This was on the announcement of Donald Trump's first presidential run.
Yeah.
So when we think back now 25 years, it's hard for me not to get a little depressed when we think about President of the Teamsters on the floor of the RNC in the election, right? Turtles, if you will, are on an accelerated path towards extinction. And I would say perhaps even more impactful is the restrictions on free speech, right? I think what oftentimes gets overlooked in the WTO protests is that it's the first no protest zone that we have now come to expect in a lot of these mass protests, not just here, but globally. One of the hook lines for this documentary I thought was really interesting was they framed it under as the last event of the 20th century, the first battle of the 21st century, right? I personally was arrested, was thrown in jail for 4 days during the whole WTO stuff. I was an organizer at the University of Washington with Miguel, with Teresa. So we look at our losses, I think you could say that we, at the time, we felt like we won a battle, and that's true. But if we look back at the last 25 years, it's hard not to look at it as a bit of a loss. And I think that's something that we all have to be really kind of aware of and continue to take events like this and see them not necessarily as an over reason for celebration, but as a spark for us to continue to fight, to continue to resist, to continue to bring these issues to the forefront. I also look at the positive. I mean, like Teresa, this is family now. Like, we've done weddings, we've gone to our children's birthday parties, and so that is something that we can take stake in, right? Our kids are here. The next generation's here. And I think that's one of the coolest things about it, right? We're still here in Seattle, we're still fighting. Teresa, one of our best politicians here in Israel. And so reason for celebration, but also a reason and a reminder that the fight is far from over. Thank you, and look forward to a documentary film coming out in the next couple months about the detail.
Thank you. So Miguel, would you like to come up? I had the great pleasure of discovering that one of the organizers of the WTO protest lived across the street from me.
I didn't introduce you, but you can. Yeah, my name is Miguel Bocanegra. I'm currently an attorney. I work with Cornell Law School on a project called Path to Papers. And I've been practicing law for the last 20 years. And I work with DACA recipients trying to help their employers get them off of DACA and get work-related visas, non-immigrant and immigrant visas. So that's what I do today. That's what I've been doing for the last 20 years. 25 years ago, I was a student at the University of Washington. And I was a student organizer with the group called the Movimiento Estudiantil Mexicano de Aztlán. And that organization has been around since the late 60s. As far as the WTO is concerned, the beauty of the title of this exhibit is really valuable because it's about legacy. What is the legacy and what is the history? As far as we were concerned, when we were organizing as students 25 years ago, the legacy of what led to the WTO started somewhere around 1492. And around that time, we were probably 500-ish years later, and in 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement was passed, and it decimated a lot of the communities in Mexico and resulted in mass migration to the United States of many, many people. And at this point, we now have about 12 to 15 million undocumented people in the United States, which are in the bullseye of Donald Trump's conversation. Well, in the 90s, what started that impetus of the mass flow of people from Mexico in particular were these free trade agreements. And in the global south, as Heather Day said, which is really where a lot of our community is from, It's not really even the global south, it's actually south of Washington, California, Arizona, New Mexico. That was Mexico, if we want to go back to 1848, right? And so these are important conversations to have because that's the history and that's the legacy, that the WTO protest was just one action item, one checklist of the struggle against what we call corporate globalization, but our ancestors called colonialism. So I think, just in terms of our experience on the ground for MECHA, for the Chicano students, the connection between the WTO and what we were doing was very, very personal. And it was connected to our communities, and NAFTA, which had already really impacted a lot of our communities and people's families who were coming up from Mexico and economically devastated areas to get decent paying jobs in Eastern Washington, picking apples, and sending that money back, which is a long legacy then. And what's important to us was that we needed to take the message of Mexicanos, which at that time was the Zapatistas, the Zapatista resistance to corporate globalization, and saying, ya basta, that this was enough, that we really needed to have a different path forward for our communities that didn't mean stripping them of their land and their resources and forcing them to sell the only thing that they had left, which are their arms and their bodies on the global market at bargain basement rates. And so I think that's the important thing when we talk about the legacy of the WTO. It's looking at also the legacy of immigration. You can't talk about the global economic impact of corporate globalization without the practical realities of how people are forced to move away from their homes and sell their labor, and then are also stripped of their identities and their ability to work, and how that suppresses their ability to make a living and sell their labor on the open market. So they have to take these horrible wages that we're already aware of. This is a cycle that long preceded the WTO, we all know that, and it's existed since. The work that I'm doing now is directly connected to these issues. And I think the focal point of what people like Donald Trump, and it's not just him, right? It's the majority of Americans. The majority of Americans support that president. We just have to be honest about that. And so what we're doing and what the legacy of the WTO is, to me, it's what are we doing to combat those systems today, as opposed to just thinking about a historical event. It really is a chain of events that we're still, unfortunately, inextricably tied to. And that, my kids who are they're going to fight the same battle, and we have to arm them with the tools that they're going to need for the next 500 years. So thank you guys for having us. Thanks for putting the exhibit together.
Thank you, Miguel. All right, we're going to wrap it up with Teresa Mosqueda, who is currently a King County Council member from District 8.
Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's good to be here with you with so many friends and familiar faces. It's good to see in the room the labor activists and community leaders. It's good to see the anarchists and the artists. It's good to see the Teamsters and the Turtles represented. I'm Teresa Mosqueda, now a King County Council member. Before that, a Seattle City Council member. Before that, the political director of the Washington State Labor Council. And before that, as Miguel and Gavin noted, when we were at the University of Washington as undergrads, we were part of the Mechistas, the Mecha movement, who joined with the WTO protesters. And we were, and I should say myself, Gavin, Sandra, hundreds and hundreds of students from around the region, but hundreds and thousands of students from around the globe, part of a contingent of student activists who left their own campuses, whether it was at the University of Washington or Seattle University, community colleges around the region, flew in and stayed with hosts like Heather mentioned, converged as part of this global week of action. We were there together to converge as part of an intersectional community that came together to protest the WTO. We happened to be in Seattle, and we came together to expose the truths of neoliberal trade policy and the erosion of self-determination. Erosion of self-determination in the name of trade and capitalism, taking people off their land, taking autonomy for people to determine their own price of goods and products. We came together to fight the theory that capitalism and neoliberalism should reign supreme, that these ideologies about the dollar should be more powerful than individual rights, or worker protections, or environmental justice, or generational health. And by 1999, we had already had 5 years of experience, the lived experience under NAFTA, and as Miguel mentioned, decades of experience of seeing how these free trade ideologies were being imposed on people around the globe, but specifically how free trade agreements were taking notably from indigenous people, taking notably from workers. And we were able to see firsthand the onslaught of how policies like NAFTA and other neoliberal policies sought to steal land and privatize it, privatize utilities and healthcare, privatize education and social services, all in the name of the lowest cost. And this is why we, from MECHA, as Miguel noted, part of the Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, dressed in solidarity with the Zapatistas. The Zapatistas were, as you will see in the exhibit, represented with a black mask, often black and red, to be in solidarity with the resistance in Chiapas and to show that we were standing in solidarity with these workers, with these activists, with the movement there that was as well decades old, but was really showing the world what it looked like to resist neoliberal policies under NAFTA. Seattle was put on the map as the face of resistance, but it was also put on the map as the phase of what the next phase of militarized police force looked like, and what militarized tactics of the police officers would be for generations to come. They showed us what the next generation of violence and weapons of war that would be deployed against civilians would look like in the name of protecting corporations and property. Tear gas and literal tanks, weapons of war deployed right here in Seattle Street against, and let's remember, against families, children, seniors. My family being one of those. My dad was a professor of political economy. I think Heather mentioned the Evergreen and Olympia connection. He brought up students from Evergreen. My mom was a parent chaperone with my sister, who was a sophomore in high school at the time, whose class came up to be part of this effort. These are families and folks who are in the street who are exposed to these types of response, militarized response from our police force. And some of you might have been part of this cohort. There was about 100 of us standing right in front of the Pike Place Market, and after being pushed from street to street by officers in riot gear, finally we were standing right in front of the Pike Place Market, in front of the iconic sign, and the officers had us cornered on Pike and First, cornered. And after being pushed around so many times, I said, where in the world are you pushing us? Where do you want us to go? We are peacefully protesting. And they said, go that way. So that way was right underneath the red Pike Place Market sign. So about 100 of us started walking that direction, and they lobbed tear gas right over us, yet again cornering peaceful protesters using military-style weapons, that being tear gas. This over-response and the tactics that we saw during the WTO, which I'm sure are on full display here at MOHAI, continue to be used to this day. The corporate greed and land stealing and prioritization of profits and multinational corporations continue to this day. So as my colleagues have mentioned, there is much to celebrate in terms of how we came together, and much more that we still have to do to take from the lessons of the WTO movement. to make sure that it wasn't a moment in time, but was truly part of the movement towards global justice. If you've been listening to the election coverage over the last month or so and the post-mortem analysis of what happened, you will hear many people talk about how this election is just another example of how neoliberal trade policies have harmed working families and created greater instabilities fueled by neoliberal trade, and has resulted in more working families, more of the working class, experiencing economic instability, having less access to good living union wage jobs. And this is all coming home to roost in terms of what we saw in the last election. Julie Buana, many of you may know her, the executive director of the Washington Fair Trade Coalition, recently wrote an article on The Stand. If you don't subscribe to thestand.org, in which she said, with recent election results still settling, we are reminded that the challenges that we face today of rising income inequality, corporate-driven trade policies, and environmental degradation are interconnected. She goes on to say, the unchecked power of multinational corporations, environmental degradation, and worsening income inequality demand that we revisit the critiques raised during the WTO protests. Bernie Sanders has said that the working class has been abandoned. And on Democracy Now! Recently, the professor from University of UCLA, Robin Kelly, said, the highly individualistic neoliberal culture of the United States makes it difficult to organize along class lines and reject the appeal of authoritarians like Trump. So for 25 years, we have looked at what happened in 1999 and as an example of what we can do when we find that intersectional power, when we find true solidarity and unite our struggles. And we must continue to find ways that we can check this unchecked neoliberalism that is upon us now, because the consequences of not doing so are playing out in the fascism that we see resulting in this month's election. As we reflect on the beauty of the streets being filled with all walks of life from all over the planet, as we think about how our intersectional struggles and our intersectional solidarity helped lead to a people's resistance that was powerful that day, and as someone said, allowed for us to win that battle, we must be reminded of what we fought for 25 years ago and to be stronger ourselves, to find stronger connections with others, because the opposition, the forces that we were fighting that day, only became stronger. As we think about how we fight against the WTO that continues, or the IMF, or the World Bank, or neoliberal trade policies of NAFTA, CAFTA, FTA, TPP, or the next alphabet soup of neoliberalism, we must find that intersectionalism that brought us together that day and remind ourselves that we can be strong again when we find that inner resistance and unite along class lines. So just like today is a anniversary, it is not necessarily a celebration that we saw in the streets of the WTO, but it is a reminder and a call for action for the next 25 years as well. Thank you for doing this, MOHAI, and for hosting all of these.
Thank you all. I'm sort of trying to figure out how a Q&A is going to work in here. So it is 10 minutes to 2. I think we probably could do a couple questions, but I am not the person who's going to answer them. So we have a mic. So maybe what will happen is you will ask your question, and then one of the people who spoke who has an answer will raise their hand and we'll hand the mic to them. Does that make sense?
I am hoping
There we go.
to
You get a mic.
introduce 2 songs.
Get a mic.
2 songs.
Oh.
So as the director of the then 14-month-old satellite course, it was really exciting to be the opening event in the stadium. The very first song we sang, I'm going to do a little excerpt, and then a little excerpt of the song that ended the day when Ann Feeney took the stage for the Steelworkers. So this so you have to remember that Titanic had just been this huge movie. And Judy Moise, one of the founding mothers of the Labor Course Committee, wrote, Here in Seattle, a historic moment, trade agreements about to be signed. What gives them the right in their mad quest for profit to make deals that leave us behind? Join if you can. Tell them things are different this time. Let them know that we're drawing the line. There will be a battle this time, and until there is justice, the fight will go on and on. There was the excerpt of the song that was sung at the end of the day was it Caesar Chavez? Maybe it was Dorothy Day. Some say Dr. King or Gandhi sent them on their way. No matter who your mentors are, it's mighty plain to see that if you've been to jail for justice, you're in good company. Have you been to jail for justice? I want to shake your hand, 'cause sitting in and lying down are ways to take a stand. Have you sung a song for freedom or marched that picket line? Have you been to jail for justice? Will you go to jail for justice? Have you been to jail for justice? Then you're a friend of mine.
Thank you so much. And I honestly feel like that is the right way to end this program. So if you have questions, I encourage you to go find the person that you want to answer that question. And see the exhibit if you haven't already.
I
Okay.
have a really quick question for
Okay.
MOHAI. After the April 27th date, will there be a portion of this
Still available?
Permanent?
We are in the process of redeveloping our permanent exhibit, and we intend to work more of the material from this exhibit into the new one. It won't be for a couple of years, but we do intend to tell more of this story in the permanent exhibit, yes.
So this exhibit here is going to be open until April 27th?
Correct, yes,
Okay.
yes. And I want to just have a few little things. I want to thank Sue Garcia for captioning. I want to thank the Hugh and Jane Ferguson Foundation, which sponsored the exhibit, and our partners at UW Labor Archives of Washington State, and Jim Gregory, the curator again. I encourage you to buy anti-capitalist merch in the gift shop. Including, there's a new book out by D.W. Gibson called One Week to Change the World, which is very inspiring for this exhibit as well. They can also sell you a membership if you want to, like what you see here, and you want to support our work going forward. The show will be up through the end of April, and there are a few events coming up if you want to learn more, and maybe there will actually be Q&As at those events. December 11th, the curator James Gregory will be in conversation with Jill Friedberg, a documentary filmmaker, and Julia Boana from Washington Fair Trade Coalition. So that event will be here at MOHAI on Wednesday, December 11th. We're going to screen Jill's documentary on January 28th. This is what democracy looks like. We'll have a storytelling event in March where we'll all be able to tell our stories. Also, we're rescheduling our WTO walking tour that Heather Day is going to lead, which got rained out, but will happen in April. And I think that is the list of events so far. So,
David Solnit coming in March.
say that again?
We're doing a protest art making event with MOHAI and David Solnit, I believe on March 22nd.
Excellent, yes. So another reason to become a member, and then you'll get all this information. Thank you all for being here. Really, it's been such an honor to work on this show, and I'm really excited that so many of you turned out to be part of this. Please spread the word. Thank you.